Okay, quiz question for you. 1894, what happened in the world of science? Come on, quick. Anyone? Anyone? No? Keep going. Radio? No. Tesla demonstrated force at a distance. 1894. 1922, the BBC started broadcasting from this building. And there's a plaque somewhere and stuff, and it's all quite exciting. The point being was that engineers drove change in technology. And those changes in technology changed the way we tell stories. And it's continued to change. So 1922, BBC starts from here, government goes, oh, that's a thing. BBC at the time stood for the British Broadcasting Company. It was set up by a bunch of engineers who wanted to sell radio receivers. Turned out nobody wanted to buy radio receivers because there weren't any radio stations, so you couldn't listen to anything. So they were quite clever, and they thought, I know what we'll do. We'll set up some radio stations, maybe the BBC, and we'll start making some programs. And people bought radios. It was very successful, and the government thought, this is an important communication channel, so what we should do is we should nationalise it. We should take it off this private company and turn it into a thing. And then in 1932, Broadcasting House opened, and the rest of it is history. But the technology changes along the way have completely made a difference to how we work. So at that point back in history, we were using valves and magnets and machines and stuff. And then transistorization came along in the early 50s. In 1970s, microprocessors appeared. By the 1990s, the internet was a real thing. Proper computers that people would recognize became a thing. We started to automate with the power of computers our radio program player. We could distribute it on the internet. The game changed. And today, in the world of radio, we're constantly told that our industry is under attack. Radio's shrinking, everything's going to the big tech companies. It's kind of not true. Okay? So for pretty much the last 10 or 20 years, radio has had 1 billion listening hours per week in the UK. That's across the BBC and commercial radio. That's 1 billion listening hours. Go find me an industry that has 1 billion anything as its measure, and then tell me it's under threat because it's stayed the same for the last period of time. It is true that technology is changing. It is true that through things like BBC Sounds and through the global player and the 1,000,001 different platforms that people have to deliver content on, there is a shift from broadcast to IP. And it is slow right now. People will tell you it's quick, but in the world of broadcast radio, it's slow. But it will come. 4, 5G, those things exist. It's going to start happening. Right? We understand that. But what becomes more interesting is that we have new players in the marketplace. So we have the Spotifys, we have the Audibles, we have 1,000,001 different podcast providers. And that is starting to put radio under pressure. But if you look at the figures, actually radio isn't under that much pressure. BBC audience has stayed much the same. Commercial radio audience has stayed much the same. What has happened is that people are listening more. And that's good for our industry, because whether you're a broadcast engineer in what we've talked about today in that traditional end-to-end stack, or you start to narrow those skills down into building studios because you're going to make more podcasts, or you're going to record bands and you're going to release them via SoundCloud, or whatever it would be, there is more audio in our society, in our industry, than ever before. And for us, as engineers in that space, that's a good thing. So, the industry's changing, the technology's changing, it will continue to change. The key thing that happened, 1894, force at a distance, Tesla, was that the at a distance thing created an ability to do things far away. Sounds really obvious, right? Society, up until that point, had always enjoyed storytellers. And you go back as far in history as you possibly can, and there's the dude who sits around the campfire and tells the stories. And that's how villages worked, that's how societies worked. What happened next was that storyteller would be particularly good, and they would move from village to village, and they'd become a travelling storyteller. Us as broadcast engineers, our job is to take those stories, tell them better than anybody else, help our creative people, and tell them over a bigger village, at a distance. And that's what we do. But the key thing about all of that, and it's the same as it's always ever been, is that we help people sing songs and tell stories. That's all we do. And if you can be part of that industry to help us, that would be awesome. Thank you.